pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Say it with me. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt. Well, that is just not true. We dive back into the book of James this morning to his section on the power of words. Contrary to the misled nursery rhyme about sticks and stones, James believes that our words have great power to do good and to do harm. And therefore, he wants us to know that it matters not just what Christians do, but what we say to one another. We know this intuitively, don't we? Anyone who has been called a derogatory name or has heard the words, "I love you," knows the power of language for good or for evil. But James is a wisdom writer, and so he goes a little bit further than that in this morning's text. He connects language to creation. Listen to the imagery he uses. It comes from the creation stories at the beginning of Genesis. When James says, every species of beast, bird, reptile, and sea creature has been tamed, but not the tongue. We recall the days, the order of creation, and then that scene in Genesis chapter 2 where God parades all the animals in front of Adam, and he gets to name them. And likewise, when James reproves us for using our tongues both to bless God and then to curse one another, those who are made in the image of God, we can't help but hear echoes of Genesis chapter 1, right? Where God creates humankind in God's image. Language has the power to create. In the beginning, God said, "Let there be light." God spoke creation into existence. And we who bear God's image do the same. Our words can speak worlds into being. For example, in English, we can wait for something, or we can hope for something. But in Spanish, the same word, esperar, means both to wait and to hope. In Spanish, you cannot wait for something without hoping for it, which changes things. Likewise, in Hebrew, the word ruach means both breath and spirit. A Hebrew speaker cannot breathe without breathing in the very, or take a breath without breathing in the very spirit of life, because they are linguistically one and the same. James calls us to be mindful about the ways we use our tongues. Our words have the power to bless and to curse, to include people in God's grace, or to turn them away. Those of you who have known me for some time know that the question of inclusive language is, yes, one of those mountains I'm willing to die on. And this is particularly true for me when it comes to the words we say and sing in worship. I believe it matters that whether the angels of the Christmas story announce peace on earth and goodwill to men, or peace on earth and goodwill to all people. Because goodwill to men would leave a few of us in this room out. And some will say, well, sure, but by men we mean all people. And they're not wrong, per se. Language has creative power. Our words create worlds. We don't, as a people, believe that God's peace and goodwill are limited to those who have a Y chromosome, so why would we speak in a way that implies that we do? Years ago, a friend introduced me to a hymn that embodies this subconscious power of language to exclude and include in a rather humorous way. The hymn is called, wait for it, If Men Go to Hell, Who Cares? Now bear with me. This is not the anthem of some radical lesbian separatist colony, nor is it a Taylor Swift breakup song. No, friends, this is a bona fide Christian hymn written by a man named Eugene Monroe Bartlett. The first verse reads, "While the world rushes on in its folly and sin, and men go down in despair to a reign where demons are shrieking within, if men go to hell, who cares?" I didn't say it was a good hymn. Now, obviously, in 1939, when Bartlett wrote this hymn, he used the word men as a stand-in for all people. But I think it's safe to say, if I walk around this afternoon downtown singing, "If men go to hell, who cares?" people probably aren't going to say, "Oh, well, by men, she means all people." James calls us to pay attention to the words that we use. With the same tongue, he admonishes, we bless the Lord and we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. My brothers and sisters, this ought not be so. This hymn is also an example of how language changes. And that makes things tricky, doesn't it? Language changes over time, across geographic distances, from person to person. Language is changing all the time. A couple generations ago, the word queer was an insult. Now it's the liberating catch-all for inclusive LGBTQIA+ community. Where I come from on the East Coast, the word Hispanic is frowned upon. People with Latin American heritage prefer to be called Latino, Latina, or Latinx. Here in Taos, if you say that someone is Latinx, people will look at you funny. The word is Hispanic. It's based on a direct lineage to Spain. Language changes across time and place and person to person. When you ask someone, "How are you?" and they say, "I'm fine," there is a broad range of meaning in that word, is there not? And I think this changing dynamic of language is part of what makes this whole process of taming the tongue so difficult. Our words create worlds, but sometimes the worlds we create are not the ones we intended. Have you ever tried to comfort someone and felt utterly ineffective because your words only seem to make it worse? Or have you ever watched someone bristle at something you said, but you have no idea what it was you said that was wrong or hurtful? How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, James writes. And the tongue is a fire. The small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. If you find yourself, if we find ourselves feeling a little overwhelmed by it all, discouraged by the impossibility of the task, well, friends, we're in good company. Because James has no answer for how to tame the tongue. Did you notice that? He has 12 verses to say about the problem, but he never offers us a solution. And that makes me wonder if ultimately our words are something that we just have to turn over to God. Perhaps the only way to really tame the tongue is to entrust it fully to God's grace. You may have recognized the final verse of today's psalm reading that Tina read for us. It's the prayer that most preachers, self-included, pray before preaching. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Guide my speech, O God, because language is powerful. Our words create worlds, so let the words I utter be filled with your grace. Last week, the choir sang an anthem penned by Sir Henry Walford Davies, God be in my head and in my understanding. God be in my eyes and in my looking. God be in my mouth and in my speaking. God be in my heart and in my thinking. God be at mine end and at my parting. Guide our speech, O God. Use it to bless and never to curse. Perhaps our language is something for which we do need to ask for God's help and God's grace. And while we are in practice of asking for grace, we may want to seek out some of that grace from one another. We've all heard of the golden rule, right? Treat others as you want to be treated. But there's a variation friends brought to my attention a few years ago. It's called the platinum rule. And it goes like this. Treat others as they want to be treated. The theory behind it is pretty simple. We're all different, so likely we want to be treated in different ways. For example, I may want people to hug me when I'm sad, and you may want people to leave you alone. So if you're feeling sad, and I treat you as I want to be treated, I'm going to be walking around trying to hug you while you're trying to get away. I don't think you're going to like that. Treat others as they want to be treated. Speak to others as they want to be spoken to. And here's the thing, friends. We can ask. We can ask people how it is they want to be spoken to. What words do you use to describe yourself? What are your pronouns? Do you prefer Hispanic or Latino? Do you call yourself disabled, handicapped, a person with a disability? What are the words you like to hear when you're sad or scared? Or do you just want me to sit with you in the silence? We don't always know the right words, do we? We don't know how to tame the tongue. But we don't have to know, friends, because we can ask one another. We can offer each other the humility and, yes, the vulnerability of not knowing the answer. We can ask God to guide our speech. We can entrust those wily tongues to the grace of God. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to